The 6th floor of Montreal's Saint-Dominique private hospital didn't belong to the patients. It belonged to him. Everyone on staff knew it without being told. The security detail positioned at both stairwell exits made it clear enough. So did the way the floor supervisor, Mr. Thibodeau, walked 3 steps ahead of anyone else when he escorted the family in, like he was clearing a path for royalty, or for something more dangerous than royalty. Juniper Hale had been a NICU nurse for 4 years. She had worked nights at 2 other hospitals before landing at Saint-Dominique, and she thought she had seen every variation of difficult. She had held the hand of a father who lost twins in the same hour. She had stayed an extra shift because she couldn't make herself leave a baby who had no one else sitting beside the incubator. She had learned to read the monitors the way other people read faces, a flicker, a deviation, a number that moved 2 points in the wrong direction when it should have held steady. She was not prepared for the 6th floor. The Markov family, Mr. Thibodeau told her on her first morning, his voice carefully flat. The infant was admitted 4 days ago. Premature, 34 weeks. His name is Sebastian. You will address the father as Mr. Markov. You will not ask questions that aren't directly relevant to the child's care. You will document everything. Everything. He paused at the door to the private suite and looked at her with something that might have been pity. And Nurse Hale, you were assigned here because Dr. Reeves said you were the most observant nurse he had ever trained. I need you to remember that. Observe, don't react. She hadn't understood what he meant until she walked through the door and saw the man standing at the window. Nikolai Markov was not what she expected. She had heard the name before she'd ever set foot on the 6th floor. Everyone in Montreal had, the way you heard about weather systems moving in from the north, powerful and impersonal and not something you could reason with. He was in his early 40s, dark-haired, with the kind of stillness that expensive suits cannot manufacture. It came from somewhere else entirely. The 2 men standing near the far wall, hands clasped, eyes moving. They weren't bodyguards in the theatrical sense. They were extensions of his awareness. He turned when she entered, looked at her the way people look at instruments they're not sure they trust yet. You're the new one, he said, not a question. Juniper Hale, I'll be the primary nurse for Sebastian on the day shift. He held her gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable, then turned back to the window. My son has been here 11 days. He has not gained a single gram in the last 5. 3 different specialists have told me 3 different things. I am done listening to things that don't add up. Juniper looked at the incubator. Sebastian Markov weighed 4 pounds and 2 ounces at 34 weeks, which was low but not alarming on its own. What was alarming was what the chart told her next. He had weighed 4 pounds and 3 ounces 3 days ago, and 4 pounds and 4 ounces the day before that. He was losing weight, steadily, quietly, in a hospital full of specialists who had not figured out why. She pulled the chart closer and started reading from the beginning. The first week she told herself it was adjustment. New nurse, new dynamic, new family to navigate. Sebastian was on total parenteral nutrition, TPN, delivered intravenously because his gut wasn't ready to process feeds on its own. The formula was precise: protein, lipids, glucose, electrolytes, micronutrients calibrated to his exact weight and gestational age. It should have been working. For most premature infants at this stage, it did work. It wasn't working for Sebastian. She watched him the way she watched all her patients, not just the monitors but the whole picture. The way his color shifted in the afternoon light, the way his breathing ran slightly shallow when it should have deepened during sleep. Small things, not alarming on their own. Together, they made a pattern she couldn't name yet. What she could name was this. The TPN bags being delivered to Sebastian's room were labeled correctly. The barcodes matched. The seals were intact when she checked them at handoff, but something about the volumes wasn't sitting right with her. She started keeping her own notes. That was already crowded with specialist annotations and attending physician sign-offs, each one somehow contradicting the previous one. She kept her notes in a small blue notebook she carried in her scrub pocket. Flow rates, bag volumes. The exact time each bag was hung and the exact time it ran through. She cross-referenced it against the weight logs. The numbers didn't match. Not drastically. Not in a way that leaped off the page. But the TPN that should have delivered a specific caloric load based on Sebastian's weight, it wasn't delivering what was documented. The difference was subtle, consistent, deliberate. She stared at her notebook in the staff bathroom at 2:17 in the morning, 3 weeks into her assignment on the 6th floor, and felt something cold move through her. This wasn't a calculation error. Dr. Fenwick was the attending physician for Sebastian's case. He was 61 years old, had practiced neonatology for 30 years, and had a manner that suggested he had long ago stopped expecting to be questioned by nurses. He was not a bad doctor. Juniper had worked with worse. But he had developed the particular blindness that comes from certainty, the kind where you stop looking at the data in front of you because you already know what it should say. She brought her concerns to him on a Tuesday morning, quietly, before rounds. "The flow rate on the overnight TPN," she said, laying her notes open on the counter. "I've been tracking it for 2 weeks. The volumes documented don't reflect what I'm observing at bag change." Dr. Fenwick looked at the notes, looked at her. "The documentation is completed by the pharmacy and verified by the attending." "I know. That's what I'm telling you. Something between pharmacy and patient isn't adding up." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Nurse Hale." "Sir Sebastian Markov is a premature infant with a complex clinical picture. Unexplained weight loss at this stage is not uncommon. We're adjusting his formula composition. You've adjusted it twice. He's still losing. These things take time." She stood there after he walked away, her notebook still open, feeling the particular frustration of being correct and being dismissed at the same time. She went back to the supply room that night. She wasn't supposed to be there at that hour. Her shift had ended at 7. She had gone home, tried to sleep, lay on her back in the dark of her apartment staring at the ceiling, while her brain ran the numbers again and again until they turned into shapes she couldn't unsee. She drove back at midnight. The supply room on the 6th floor was different from the general pharmacy on the lower levels. It was smaller, more controlled. Access was logged. You needed a keycard, and the log would show her entry. She knew that. She swiped in anyway. The TPN bags for Sebastian's next delivery were already prepared and waiting in the refrigerated section, labeled and sealed exactly as they should have been. She lifted the first one, checked the weight. It felt right. She checked the second. It was lighter than it should have been, not by much. Barely perceptible unless you had been paying the kind of attention she had been paying. She held it up to the light, the same fluorescent, indifferent light that made everyone look slightly unwell in hospitals, and looked at the seal along the bottom edge. It had been resealed, carefully, professionally, with equipment she did not have access to, and most nurses never would. But she had grown up in a household where her father repaired medical equipment for a living, and she knew what factory seals looked like because she had spent her childhood watching him explain the difference between genuine and compromised components to hospital procurement officers. This seal had 2 sets of compression marks, the original, and one added after. Someone had opened the bag, removed a portion of the contents, and resealed it. She was still standing there, holding the bag, when the supply room door opened behind her. "What are you doing in here?" The voice belonged to a man she had seen before but never spoken to directly. His name was Bernard Cook, and his official role on the 6th floor was listed as Patient Services Coordinator, a title that explained nothing about what he actually did. He was always present, always peripheral, always watching. She had clocked him in her first week and filed him away in the category of people she didn't fully understand yet. She understood him now. She set the bag down carefully on the shelf, turned around, kept her voice even. "I came back for my notebook. I thought I left it in here after the supply check this evening." He looked at the bag she had just set down. He was not stupid, whatever he saw in her face, and she was working hard to keep it neutral. It told him something. "The supply room closes at 9, he said. "I know, I apologized to the overnight clerk. She let me in." This was a lie. She had used her keycard, the log would show it. She was buying herself time, nothing more. He looked at her for a long moment. She did not look away. "I'll walk you out," he said. She let him. In the elevator, she kept her breathing steady and her eyes forward, and she went over everything she had in her notebook and everything she now knew, and tried to build, in the approximately 45 seconds between the 6th floor and the lobby, a plan that didn't get Sebastian Markov killed and didn't get her killed along with him. She called her father at 1 in the morning. Not for comfort, for a specific question about seal compression marks, and whether there were facilities in Montreal that had the equipment to replicate a pharmaceutical-grade TPN bag seal. He answered on the third ring the way he always did, already alert because he had spent 40 years in medical equipment, and he had learned that calls at 1 in the morning were rarely social. She explained what she had found, not the context, just the technical question. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "The equipment you're describing, bag resealing at that grade, it's not hospital equipment, it's pharmaceutical manufacturing equipment. You'd need a clean room, controlled environment, either a rogue compounding pharmacy or someone with access to a contracted facility. If I sent you a photograph of the seal, could you tell me if it matches anything you've seen? Send it." She had photographed the bag on her phone before Cook had appeared. She sent the image. Her father called back in 12 minutes. "That compression pattern," he said slowly. "I've seen it before. 3 years ago, I was called in to assess equipment at a compounding facility in Laval that had a contract dispute with Saint-Dominique. I remember it because the seal patterns were unusual. They were using a modified press that left a double ridge on the lower margin. Is the facility still operating? But the ownership is the same." She wrote the name in her notebook. Underneath it she wrote, "Bernard Cook," and then, because she had been doing the math for the past hour, she wrote the name she hadn't wanted to write, Dr. Fenwick. Not because she was certain he was involved, because she couldn't afford to be wrong about who she trusted. She did not go to hospital administration. She had considered it and rejected it within the same breath. Saint-Dominique was not a public hospital. It was a private facility with a board of directors whose names she didn't know and whose interests she couldn't map. If Cook had access to the 6th floor at the level he did, if he had managed to compromise the TPN supply chain without triggering the pharmacy's verification protocols, he had help from somewhere inside the institution's structure. She had exactly one move that didn't put her entirely at the mercy of people whose loyalties she couldn't confirm. She went to Nikolai Markov. She was fully aware, not a straightforward decision. She had spent 6 weeks watching this man from a professional distance. She had seen the way people behaved around him, not with deference, but with the specific caution of people who understood that a wrong word in the wrong moment carried consequences beyond a reprimand. She had seen him sit beside his son's incubator for hours, without moving, without speaking, in a silence so absolute it felt like a held breath. She had seen him look at Sebastian the way she had seen very few people look at anyone. As if the child were the only fixed point in a universe he otherwise considered entirely fluid and negotiable. She requested a meeting through Mr. Thibodeau, citing a clinical matter she was not comfortable raising through normal channels. Thibodeau looked at her for a long moment, then made a call she wasn't meant to hear, and 15 minutes later she was standing in the private sitting room adjacent to Sebastian's suite. Nikolai Markov did not sit. He stood near the window the way he always stood near windows, as if he preferred to have his back to something solid and his sight line unobstructed. "You said it was clinical," he said. "It is," she told him. Not everything immediately. She built it the way she had built her case in her notebook, starting with the weight discrepancy, moving to the flow rate data, arriving at the re-steeled bag. She laid her notebook open on the table between them. She showed him the photograph on her phone. She told him what her father had said about the seal compression pattern and the compounding facility in Laval. He listened without interrupting. This was something she had not anticipated, that a man with his particular reputation would have the discipline to hear something like this without his expression moving. He was watching her the way she watched monitors, looking for the thing underneath the surface reading. When she finished, he said, "How long have you known?" "With certainty, since last night." "With suspicion, 3 weeks." "Why didn't you go to Fenwick?" "Because I don't know how far this goes inside the hospital, and because the last time I raised the weight discrepancy with him, he dismissed it." He was quiet. The silence in the room felt different from ordinary silence. It had weight and direction. "Cook saw you in the supply room." "Yes. He knows you found something. He suspects it. I don't think he knows what I have." Markov looked at the notebook on the table, then at her. "You came to me instead of leaving." It wasn't quite a question. She answered it anyway. "Your son is losing weight and nobody is stopping it. I'm not leaving." Something shifted in his face, not dramatically. A man like Nikolai Markov did not do things dramatically. But the quality of his attention changed, the way a room changes when someone opens a window. He picked up his phone and made a call in a language she didn't speak. Russian, she thought, or something close to it, and when he hung up he said, "I need you to get Sebastian's next TPN delivery, pulled before it reaches the room. Can you do that through the nursing station without raising a flag? I can request a hold on the delivery, citing a weight-based recalculation. It's routine enough that it won't look unusual. Do it. Don't document the real reason, and the bags in the supply room. Don't touch them again. Don't go near that room." She picked up her notebook. He watched her. "Nurse Hale." She stopped. "I am going to find out who is responsible for this. When I do..." He paused. "I would prefer that you not know the specifics of what happens after." She understood what he was telling her. She also understood that she was standing in a room with a man whose methods of resolution were not the methods she would choose, and that what was about to happen was going to happen regardless of her preferences, and that what mattered right now, the only thing that mattered, was the 4-pound boy in the incubator 20 feet away, who had been slowly starved for weeks by someone who had calculated that he was worth more to certain people dead than alive. "I'll put the hold in now," she said, and left. The TPN hold triggered a chain of events she witnessed only partially. She placed it at 7:40 in the morning. By 8:15, 2 men she had never seen before had arrived on the 6th floor and gone directly into the private suite without stopping at the nursing station. By 9, Cook was no longer on the floor. By 9:30, Dr. Fenwick arrived for rounds, looking the way men look when they have already been told something that morning that has rearranged the architecture of their day entirely. He reviewed Sebastian's chart without speaking to her, initialed the hold notation, and left without his usual pronouncements. What happened next she learned only through fragments, and the particular telegraphing that happens in institutions when something significant has shifted. The way conversations stop 2 seconds too late when you turn a corner. The way people make eye contact with each other instead of with you. What she pieced together. Cook had been on the 6th floor in an arrangement that benefited a competing family in Montreal's particular political geography. One that had decided Sebastian Markov's death would create enough instability in his father's organization to allow for a shift in territory. The compounding facility in Laval was connected. The TPN bags had been compromised at the source, not by removing the nutritional content entirely, but by diluting it enough that the deficit compounded over weeks without triggering a single alarm. It was slow, careful, patient in the way that only premeditated plans are patient. Dr. Fenwick, she eventually confirmed, had not been part of it. He had simply been doing what comfortable certain men do when a nurse questions their conclusion, dismissing it. His blindness had been complicity of the most ordinary kind, and she suspected he would spend a long time understanding that. She did not know what happened to Cook. She made a deliberate choice not to find out. What she knew was this: Sebastian's weight was 4 pounds and 7 ounces by the end of that week. 4 pounds and 11 ounces the week after. His color improved. His breathing deepened during sleep the way it was supposed to. The monitors stopped making her hold her breath. He was going to be fine. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon in late November, when the first real snow of the season was making the Montreal streets look briefly forgiving, Nikolai Markov stopped her in the corridor outside Sebastian's room. He was in his coat, which meant he had just arrived or was about to leave, and he held a flat package under one arm that he extended toward her without preamble. "From Sebastian," he said. "And from me." She took it, held it without opening it. "How is he?" 8 days in a row of weight gain. Dr. Reeves says we can begin oral feeding trials next week. Something in his voice when he said this, not softness exactly, but the sound of a man who has been carrying something heavy, setting it down for just a moment. "He's going to be loud, I can tell already. He complains about everything." Juniper looked at the package. "You didn't have to. You stayed," he said simply. "When you didn't have to, when it would have been considerably safer not to." She had thought about this, in the weeks between finding the rice-sealed bag and now, why she had stayed. She had told herself it was clinical, that a nurse's job was to advocate for the patient, that what she had found demanded action, that leaving would have been a failure of everything she had trained 4 years to be. All of that was true. It was also true that she had sat beside Sebastian's incubator on a quiet Sunday morning, watching him breathe, and felt the particular pull of someone you have claimed responsibility for, however briefly and professionally, and known that she could not walk away from that any more than she could walk away from her own name. "He needed someone who was paying attention," she said. "I was paying attention." Markov looked at her for a moment with the same quality of attention he had shown her in the sitting room, the kind that took accurate inventory without telegraphing its conclusions. "I know," he said. He left. She stood in the corridor with the flat package and listened to the sound of the monitors from Sebastian's room. Steady, even, exactly where they were supposed to be, and felt something settle in her chest that had been unsettled for a long time. She opened the package later, in the staff break room over cold coffee. Inside was a framed photograph she didn't recognize at first, a wide shot of a city at night, lights scattered across darkness, taken from somewhere high. On the back in handwriting that was not Markov's, too careful, too deliberate, the hand of someone writing slowly and with intent, was a single line: "The person who looks after my father looks after all of us." Mr. Thibodeau, she realized. Of course, she sat with it for a long time. Outside the window, the snow was still falling over Montreal, and somewhere down the hall, Sebastian Markov was breathing steadily in the dark, gaining weight, complaining about everything, magnificently and furiously alive.